Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Hard Feelings podcast. This is a sermon series that we have been going through as a church this fall. And our church theme for the entire year is called Divinely Designed, meaning we are all divinely designed by God. And we are taking a look at different hard feelings every week and diving a little bit deeper into what those emotions might be. And we are so thankful that we have wonderful doctors and counselors and licensed therapists among us in our own church community who have given their time to come on our podcasts and again, dive a little deeper into each one of these feelings. And so we've invited some of them to join us to give their expertise on a professional level. And today we are so excited. This is our last final of 5 podcasts, and we are going out today with the wonderful Em Cummins. We are so excited that you are here. I am so excited to be talking with you today. We will be talking about emotional maturity. So Em, thank you so much for being with us. Just to kick us off, can you just give a little background on maybe your education, your profession, and your passion, or why it was that you entered into your field of study?
Sure, Evan. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Great to chat with you. Yeah, you know what? Whenever you talk to anyone who's further along in life and is in a profession, you say, how did you ever become whatever you become? The answer is often along the line of, well, I'm not quite sure how I got here from where I started, and I'm certainly in that category. I started out as a high school kid thinking I wanted to be a minister. That was my goal. I was active in my church. My dad was not a pastor. My dad was a Christian layman, but I had several relatives, uncles who were ministers, and most of the family were church-oriented Christian folks, Baptists. I am a refugee from that particular tradition. And so I thought I wanted to be a minister. So I went to Wheaton College, and I declared myself pre-ministerial. And about my junior year, it came to me in a variety of signs that I was not cut out to be a pastor. That would have been a terrible choice. So I switched my major to literature, of all things, and became a high school English teacher. First, I went off to USC, got a master's degree in counseling because I was interested in psych and counseling. And then I became a high school English teacher for a couple of years and decided to go back and get a doctorate in psychology. So I went back to Michigan State, became a PhD in counseling psychology, and wound up at Wheaton College for a couple of years as Associate Dean of Students and Assistant Professor of Psychology. And I stayed there a couple of years before making a big switch, coming out to San Diego State, where I became a Professor of Counseling. Shortly after my arrival here, I sat through the licensure exam to become a psychologist in California. So I was a licensed psychologist. I opened up a small private practice, and I taught psychological counseling and did counseling and psychotherapy. And that's pretty much the way I've spent the rest of my career.
Well, we're so thankful that you're here. Yeah, we're so thankful that we're here. We'll slide by the USC comment in there. I have a little Bruin in me.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. But we are, again, thankful for your background, that you are here. And today we are talking, again, about emotional maturity. So for someone listening to this, and for myself included, how would you, in your own words, maybe define what emotional maturity is?
Good question. You know, it's a kind of question you have to define in terms of the stage or the season of life that a person is in. Because what is emotional maturity for a 16-year-old, for example, is different from emotional maturity for a 35-year-old or for a 60 or 70-year-old.
Sure.
Maturity is a relative concept, and it's dependent upon the stage of development of the person that's in question, to whom you're asking that question or who's providing an answer to that question. And I've been struck throughout my professional career particularly with the concept of stages of development. They really got their start with Freud. And I will confess that part of my doctoral training was as a Freudian.
Okay.
I'm not a Freudian. Relax. Just don't want you
we'll calm down.
to understand. But later on, a neo-Freudian by the name of Erik Erikson in the 1950s took Freud's concepts and translated them into the entire lifespan, where he came up with these different stages, or I like to think of them as seasons of life that we go through, each one rather different, with a different set of responsibilities, a different set of self-perceptions, and a different set of goals and aspirations. And just to summarize, let me just mention two of them. One of the critical stages that he identified that I think is really important is what he calls adolescence. It's the stage of identity. He said that's the time. Roughly, there's no specific year for this, but this would be roughly between, let's say, 16, 17, 18, and maybe the early 20s, when a person really comes to terms with who he or she really is. And that is a sign of emotional maturity right there. When a person begins to become comfortable in his or her own skin and decides, well, this is who I am. This is what I'm about, and then I'm going to plan my life accordingly. Now, at the far end of the spectrum is the older age retired spectrum that I happen to be in now. And there, interestingly enough, Erikson posited the word wisdom. The word he posited for adolescence was identity, coming to terms with one's identity. And at the other end of the spectrum, at the closing end, he said the positive goal is wisdom. And wisdom is really a way of having a much larger perspective of what reality is and seeing the whole picture rather than just seeing one narrow picture from your own point of view.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, and thank you for sharing that. The one piece in there that I caught, having been a youth pastor for so many years, was the identity piece. I think you mentioned age 22 and just the different ages and stages, and so many of those leaders, especially in the church, will come right out of Christian college, like not knowing even the slightest on some level of their own identity. They're still trying to figure it out. It's just interesting, that gap of then trying to lead those who aren't that far behind.
It is.
In that realm. So it puts me back in that place of I still don't know what I'm doing really, but of not quite knowing much about myself and trying to lead others. So that is just a good way to kind of think that through. So as
just to pick up on that too, in the United States, it's been pointed out by psychologists, particularly in Europe and other countries, that adolescence has been delayed in the United States considerably. Adolescence being a time when one is still dependent on his parents or his caregivers for not only emotional support, but for financial support, just being taken care of and not being independently self-supporting. And that stage now extends sometimes into the 30s, particularly for people who go to graduate school throughout their 70s, maybe people who are studying to be physicians or they're working on PhDs or advanced degrees. They're rather dependent, if not on their parents, on a funding agency to take care of them and support them until they can finally assume an identity and become independent and self-supporting. And that, in Erikson's concept, is where adolescence ends. At that point, you've decided who you are and what you're about, and you're ready to launch on, but now you're supporting yourself. And that can be as late as the late 20s or early 30s. And that's, for some people, it never comes, incidentally.
Well, and that's crazy to think about. We think adolescence is a 15-year-old, and that compared to a 32-year-old, and still potentially around that same stage. So going along with that, myself, or again, someone who's listening to this, how would you recommend or tell someone, how would they begin the process of exploring emotional maturity in their own lives? So what's a step that one might take in that if they have never really thought that through before?
Okay, that's a great question. One of the ways I might approach that would be to ask the person to define who they are. Who are you? I mean, that's a big question. It sounds fairly simple. You could just say your name, rank, and serial number, but who are you really? And then as a person explores who he is or she is, they bring into bear and into play the experiences they've had, where they were born, how they were raised, what their mother tongue was, what they've learned, what kind of their outlook is on life, and looking at all of those, and then how they seem to be interacting with the world in which they find themselves. Now, if they're students, maybe they would put that in terms of the school they attend, the college they attend, if in fact they are in some kind of college. If not, if perhaps they've decided just to launch out on their own and become independent, whoever they're working with or relating with. And then to try to discover how it is that they're fitting into that situation in terms of their own degree of satisfaction, life satisfaction, happiness, a sense of achievement, or is there a lot of sense of frustration that one is not really living up to one's potential, one is not as happy as he thinks he should be because a lot of the goals that he thought he once had, or maybe still has, are not being met. And if that's the case, maybe in a counseling session, a group therapy session, or individual, to begin to explore some ways about how he or she can find ways to accomplish what it was that he or she wanted to accomplish in the first place. Yeah. And that would be a real step toward emotional security. And it takes into account also another element that I would include that's very important called empathy. The ability to see a situation, to see circumstances, even to look at oneself, not just from a totally selfish standpoint, but from how other people might see it too.
Yeah.
So you're not looking at your life situation, your problem, the issue that you're dealing or struggling with, the way you see it through your own narrow focus of your limited experience, but you're enriching that by adding the experience and the perspective of other people. And some of this you get through reading, through watching movies, and through experiences of that sort. It gives you a wider perspective of the situation that you may be dealing with.
Yeah, that's really good. That's also very tough to do.
It is.
to allow that, invite that in.
But, it truly is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I know you personally, and I know your heart, and I know your faith, and you have a deep faith. But I'm curious on how you integrate that faith into your practice. And over the years, especially serving for so long in a public arena, how does maybe the internal in you come out in an appropriate way as you practice your counseling and speaking with others?
That's a great question. Because I did spend most of my professional life in a state university, a public university, San Diego State. I was a Christian. Shortly after I started teaching at SDSU, I became an elder in my church. So I'm a committed Christian person. That's my basic orientation. At the same time, I'm working in a public tax-supported institution that serves everyone, regardless of their religious affiliation or of no religious affiliation. So actually in my teaching and in my practice, I had to take that into account. So how could I be fully Christian, trying to live out the gospel and the Great Commission, and at the same time not be patronizing or trying to win converts from the people that I'm teaching and counseling? And that was always a kind of a struggle for me. It was always something I had in the back of my mind, but I tried to scrupulously remain in a kind of a setting where I was practicing the principles and the basic ethical standards of my Christian faith without quoting scriptural verses or trying to convert my clients or my students.
Sure.
Now, on the one hand, many of them knew just from other things I said of my Christian affiliation and my background. But in terms of my presenting material in class or sitting with a client face-to-face or running a group, which I did a lot of group therapy in those years, I did not attempt to to bring in Bible passages or bring in my Christian faith as the only way to go forward. I did bring in a lot of elements that had to do with honesty and integrity, that had to do with empathy and taking into account the feelings and considerations of others, and bringing a lot of those Christian ethics to bear without particularly identifying them as Christian.
Yeah, well, and thank you for doing that. I think too often that is, this is our church podcast, and we lumped in as Christians might get a bad name certain times for trying to push a certain agenda or saying this is the only way, but to actually have your faith lived out in that way that's all encompassing. Bless you for that.
Right. Thank you.
Just a couple more questions here. I would love to know how you might encourage someone who is feeling discouraged with their emotional well-being. How might you start? How would you encourage someone like that?
Okay, yeah, that's often what brings people into therapy, either group therapy or individual therapy. There's a dissatisfaction. It could be just an unhappiness. It could be the kind of depressed. It could be feelings of shame or guilt that they just don't seem to be able to shed, to cast off, and to overcome. And so I think there are three aspects of, actually four, but we'll talk about three right here. There are thoughts and feelings and actions. People have thoughts, people have feelings, people have actions or behaviors, and they come in, and those three are not always in sync, and sometimes their actions get them into trouble. They behave in ways that are inappropriate. For example, they can't handle their anger. And you've all heard of anger management classes where people are actually taught techniques for managing angry behavior. And I would say that goes one step further. Feelings are something we really can't help. You get a feeling. I mean, the feeling's there. And you can't really judge the feeling as good or bad. The feeling may not be very satisfying to you, but the feeling is there. And it's very important, I think, for a person to acknowledge whatever feeling or feelings he or she has to himself or herself, and also to a helper, a professional helper, if he or she's in therapy. But often it's the thoughts that lead to the feelings. And thoughts are something we do have control over. Thoughts are something that we can actually learn how to manage in a very effective way. And there's a whole branch of psychotherapy called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, that enables people to actually develop new ways of thinking, to develop a new language, a new way, if you will, of talking to yourself, so that you can help to shape or modify the feelings that may ensue, or it may help to diminish some feelings that you find very painful or difficult, simply by changing the narrative conversation that you're having within yourself. And that's where that comes in.
Yeah.
And thoughts, feelings, behaviors, I left out a spiritual element entirely. And that's another element that we did address actually at the State University in our classes. In fact, I introduced a class called Spiritual Aspects of Family Therapy, in which we talked about not a specific religion, but about a spiritual dimension of human beings that is part of us, is created in the image of God, that is addressed and comes out in various ways, often through art, or through dance expression, through music, through literature, and things of this way, that enable people to get in touch with a spiritual dimension without it having to be specifically religious. Those of us who are blessed to be in the Christian faith and tradition, of course, have a language and a book and a faith that enables us to do that in a really adaptive way. Those that don't can still address the spiritual dimension of their lives, even without having to invoke religion per se.
That's really good. Yeah, thank you for everything you just said. That's really good. Well, Em, is there anything else as we sort of land our conversation here? Is there anything else that was maybe sparked in you, or anything else that you want to share on this topic that we've been exploring today?
Well, when I was reviewing my notes before I came here, I had printed out Erickson's stages of development, and I looked at the stage that I'm in, and the major attribute of my stage should be wisdom. And I was thinking about what wisdom is. And as I've grown older, and as I've had a lot of kinds of experiences, I'm a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and I've gone through a lot of stuff, as you can imagine. And one of the blessings of getting older, and this long before you're my age, is the older you get and the more experiences you've had, the more you've read, the more people you've met, the more interpersonal contacts you've had, the greater the perspective you have of life and of events and of things. So instead of overreacting to something that happens, you watch the evening news and you get really angry about something, or you get a text or something in social media that really sets you off. If you have a perspective in which to consider this and look at the broader picture, it's much easier to sit back and kind of shake your head and say, yes, that's come up before. That's not new. That's going to be manageable. I don't like it, but that's the way it is, and I think somehow we're going to be able to manage that in some way without going berserk, getting angry or flying off the handle or whatever. And I really push that concept of a larger perspective, looking at the big picture rather than just the narrow picture that it's so easy to look at from your own life experience.
Amen. Yeah, may we all grow in wisdom in that way. Well, Em, thank you so much for being here today. You can't thank you enough for just spending time and just your obvious wealth of knowledge on this topic and just your heart and who you are. And we thank all of you who have been part of this podcast over the past 5 weeks. If you have missed any of them, please go back, watch them on YouTube, or go find them wherever you get your podcasts at. I want to let you know as well, as we do every week, we have our guests drop some resources, and so those will be in a link in the description for you. So Em's got some resources for you on this topic that can take you a little bit further if you're interested. So make sure that you go and check that out. Again, thank you for sticking with us over these 5 weeks. Go back, listen to the ones that you haven't, and listen to the ones that you have maybe 2 or 3 more times, or send them to a friend if you think it might be helpful. But we're just happy that you are part of this community wherever you are, however you're watching this, however you're listening. All right, have a beautiful day.